All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get into it today?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm always ready to get into it.
Awesome. So today we're going to be diving into a podcast that I found that's in Hindi, and it is about the excuses that people use when they're running late.
Okay.
And yeah, so obviously, like we've all used excuses before, and I think it's really interesting to look at it from a cultural perspective and see what kind of excuses are used in other cultures.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see like how much overlap there is too.
Totally.
Because I think so many excuses are just kind of universal.
Yeah, like, are there any, like, super unique Indian excuses?
All right.
We'll find out.
That's what we're here to find out.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, like, I've definitely, I'm not gonna lie, I've used my fair share of excuses over the years, but this podcast had some really good ones and some that I thought were really funny and clever.
Okay, well, let's hear some of them.
Okay, so, like, right off the bat, they start with the classic traffic was a nightmare, but the host makes a joke about how in places like Mumbai and Delhi, that's practically a year-round excuse.
Right.
Which, I mean, it's true. Like, you think about the traffic in those cities, it's probably pretty
That's
bad.
probably a pretty safe bet. Yeah.
So if you live in Mumbai or Delhi, like, you can just use that excuse all the time, and it's probably true.
I wonder if people get like desensitized to it at some point.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, do you stop believing people when they say they were stuck in traffic?
I guess it depends on like their track record.
Yeah,
If they're always late and always blaming it on traffic, maybe you start to doubt them.
totally. So maybe you need to come up with some more creative excuses.
Exactly.
So one that I thought was really funny was I was chased by a dog.
Okay.
And I was like, is this like a real thing? Are people actually getting chased by dogs all the time in India, or is that just like a funny excuse?
Or is dog chase like a popular pet name?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like maybe that's their dog's name.
Right.
Like, oh, sorry, dog chase was chasing me.
Dog chase got out again.
Yeah, exactly.
It does make you wonder, though, like, what are the cultural norms around dogs in India?
Right. Like, are there a lot of stray dogs?
That would make the excuse more believable.
Totally. Yeah, if there's like packs of wild dogs roaming the streets, then that's a pretty legitimate excuse.
Definitely.
So another one that I thought was funny was the elevator broke.
Okay.
Which, like, I don't know if that's still a believable excuse in this day and age.
Well, it depends on the building, I guess.
Yeah, like if you live in a building that doesn't even have an elevator,
Then it's a pretty obvious lie.
then you're busted.
Yeah.
But, maybe in some older buildings that still have those like really slow elevators.
Yeah, maybe it's still a possibility.
Yeah, it could break down.
It could happen.
So I don't know. I feel like that one's a little outdated, but
Maybe they just haven't updated their excuse repertoire.
yeah, maybe they need to get with the times.
They're stuck in the past.
But then there are some excuses that are just timeless. Like they're always going to work no matter what.
Look what.
Like this one, my mom sent me to get milk.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Like, how many times have you used that one?
I don't know if I've ever actually used that one,
Really?
but I've definitely heard it.
Yeah, I feel like everyone's mom has sent them to get milk at some point in their lives.
It's like the universal errand.
Yeah, exactly. Like, is it just me, or are moms always sending people to get milk?
I think it's the mom thing.
Maybe it's like a code word for something else.
Right.
Like, I need you to go do this thing, but I'm just going to tell you to go get milk.
Don't ask questions, just go get the milk.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what's the most common excuse, according to this podcast?
Okay, so the podcast says that the most common excuse, and the one that apparently screams laziness, is...
Let me guess. My alarm didn't go off.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's got to be the most common excuse everywhere.
I know, right? It's like the go-to excuse for anyone who's running late.
It's just so easy. Yeah, it's like you don't even have to think about it.
And it's hard to disprove.
Exactly. Like, how can anyone prove that your alarm actually went off?
Right, unless they were there in your room.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
like the perfect excuse.
But I think there's more to it than just laziness sometimes.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what are some other reasons why people might use that excuse?
Well, I think sometimes it's about avoiding responsibility.
Okay.
Like you don't want to admit that you just slept in, so you blame it on your alarm.
Right.
But I think other times it's tied to deeper psychological needs, like maybe you're afraid of disappointing someone or you're worried about looking incompetent.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's not always just about being lazy.
Okay. I see what you mean.
It can be a way of protecting ourselves.
Yeah. Like, we're trying to save face, even if it means bending the truth a little bit.
Exactly. And that's something that this podcast really digs into. Like, what are the downsides of this excuse-making habit?
Okay. So let's get into that then.
Let's do it. Yeah, like, have you ever noticed how someone loses credibility when they constantly have an excuse for everything?
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like they become the excuse person and you just stop taking them seriously.
It's like the boy who cried wolf, right?
Right.
Eventually, people just stop believing you, even when you might be telling the truth.
Exactly. And that can really damage your relationships, both personal and professional.
Yeah, for sure. Like, if you're always late for work and you always have an excuse, your boss is going to start to think you're not reliable.
Totally. And then your coworkers might start to resent you because they have to pick up your slack.
And in personal relationships, it can be even worse.
Yeah. Like if you're always flaking on plans with your friends because you have some excuse, they're going to start to think you don't value their time.
Right. And they might stop inviting you to things.
Which is fair.
Yeah, it's totally fair.
Like nobody wants to be friends with the person who's always making excuses.
Right.
So the podcast also points out that excuses can hurt your reputation.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, people might start seeing you as unreliable or disrespectful of their time.
Right, which is not exactly a good look.
No, not at all.
Like if you want people to think highly of you, you got to own up to your mistakes and be accountable for your actions.
Exactly. And that's something that the podcast really emphasizes, like the importance of honesty.
Okay, so let's talk about that then. Like, what's the podcast's take on honesty?
Well, they basically argue that telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is the best policy.
Okay, I can see that. Like, it definitely simplifies things.
Yeah, for sure. Like, no more mental gymnastics.
Mhm.
Try and remember which excuse you used with whom.
Right.
And you don't have to worry about getting caught in a lie.
Totally. It's like you're freeing up all this mental space that you were using to keep track of your excuses.
Exactly.
Plus, think about the impact on your relationships. Like, honesty builds trust and respect.
Absolutely. It shows that you value the other person and that you're willing to be vulnerable with them.
Yeah, and that can really strengthen your connection. To drive this point home, the podcast uses a hilarious skit, and I've got to share it with you.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So it's about these two friends, and one of them is notorious for his elaborate excuses.
Oh, I can already see this coming.
So picture this one friend asks the other, "Dude, you're late again. What's the excuse this time?"
Oh, dear.
Well, the late friend insists, No, I'm telling the truth. This time there was so much traffic."
But of course, his friend doesn't believe him.
Of course not. He's like, "Oh, so now you're being honest? Last week you claimed a dog was chasing you."
That's hilarious.
I know, right? And the best part is the late friend's response. He's like, "Well, the dog thing was true, just a slightly modified version of the truth."
Oh, man. That's so good. It's like he can't even admit that he's lying.
I know. It's like he's so used to making excuses that he can't even tell the truth anymore.
And it's funny, but it also makes you think, like, how often do we do that?
Yeah, like how often do we stretch the truth or embellish a story just to make ourselves look better?
I think we've all done it at some point.
Probably. Yeah, it's a very human thing to do.
Definitely.
So what does all this mean for you, our dear listener? What if we took a cue from this Hindi podcast and challenged ourselves to be more honest about why we're late?
I think that's a great challenge. Like, instead of automatically reaching for an excuse, maybe we should pause and ask ourselves, what's the real reason behind my lateness?
Yeah, and maybe the answer will surprise you. It could be that you need to leave a little earlier or set better boundaries or even just be more realistic about travel time.
Or maybe there's a deeper issue at play, like procrastination or perfectionism.
Right, like sometimes those things can contribute to lateness in unexpected ways.
Definitely.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the cultural nuances of excuse making. I mean, who knew traffic in Mumbai was like a get out of jail free card?
It just goes to show that what's considered an acceptable excuse can vary widely from culture to culture.
And that's something to keep in mind, not just when we're traveling, but also in our everyday interactions.
Yeah, for sure. Like, we all come from different backgrounds and experiences, and those shape how we view things like punctuality and the reasons behind being late.
So next time you encounter someone who's late, maybe try approaching the situation with a little more empathy and understanding.
That's a great point. Like, instead of jumping to conclusions or judging their excuses, try to see things from their perspective.
Exactly. You might be surprised by what you learn.
You never know.
This Hindi podcast has given us a lot to think about, but it also leaves us with a burning question. What are other cultures' approaches to lateness? Are there places where it's not even considered rude to be running behind?
Now, that's a question that deserves its own deep dive.
Right. Like imagine a world where nobody stresses about being late.
That would be amazing.
I know, right? It would be like a utopia.
Maybe we'll explore that in a future episode.
Okay, so until then, happy trails, everyone. And remember, the next time you're running late, try blaming it on a rogue peacock.
That's a good one.
You never know. It just might work. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I got to ask, like, what are your biggest takeaways from this whole excuse exploration?
Honestly, Uh, I think for me, it's the reminder that honesty, even when it's kind of scary or awkward, can be so freeing.
Yeah, totally. Like stripping away all those justifications and just owning up to things. It takes some guts, but it feels so much better in the long run, right?
Right, exactly. And I think it builds trust, not just with other people, but also with yourself.
That's a really good point. It's like you're being true to yourself, and that's got to count for something.
Absolutely. And the podcast really emphasized that too, like the internal cost of constantly making excuses,
Hmm.
the guilt, the anxiety.
Oh, yeah. I mean, who wants to walk around feeling like that all the time? It's exhausting.
Right. It's like you're carrying around all this baggage and it just weighs you down.
So next time you're tempted to reach for that easy excuse, maybe just pause for a second and ask yourself, what's the real reason here?
Yeah. And maybe the answer will surprise you. Maybe you realize it's something you can actually change or work on.
Exactly. Like maybe you need to tweak your schedule or be more upfront with people about your limits.
Or maybe it's something deeper, like you said earlier, procrastination or perfectionism.
Right. Sometimes those things can really mess with your ability to be on time.
Definitely.
So, what started as this fun exploration of excuses in another culture has actually turned into something pretty profound, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's really made me think about my own habits and how I can be more honest and accountable in my life.
Me too. And I hope it's done the same for our listeners out there.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Really insightful.
Totally. So, until next time, folks, keep exploring, keep questioning. And remember, even when you're running late, there's always room for a little honesty and a dash of humor.